They stole 12 years of my existence. Now, broke and desperate, they only followed the glittering scent of the fortune they never imagined I could possess. The sound of the polished brass knocker hitting the thick, obsidian-painted door echoed with a hollow finality. It was a sound that belonged to a past I had meticulously buried beneath the foundations of my new life. I straightened the velvet lapels of my silk robe, a garment that felt like armor, and walked toward the entrance. My home was no mere beach house. It was the sanctuary, a sprawling 3-story historic Victorian mansion perched on the rugged cliffs of coastal Maine. It spoke of deep history, earned luxury, and above all, unbreakable peace. Every floorboard, every stained glass panel, every whisper of the relentless Atlantic wind carried the scent of my $11 million inheritance, a colossal, rare coin collection I'd sold 3 months prior that had instantly transformed my destiny. When the heavy door swung inward, it revealed 2 figures who had been nothing more than ghosts in my memory for 12 long years. My daughter, Seraphina Vance, or Sarah, as she insisted on being called, and her husband, Rhys Vance. Their forced smiles were brittle, cracking around the edges as their gazes instantly swept past me, greedily assessing the opulent foyer. They took in the sweeping staircase with its carved mahogany railings, the deep, rich colors of the Persian rug, and the antique clock that chimed the quarter hour with a dignified, dismissive tone. "Mother," Sarah murmured, her voice thin and reedy, a shadow of the vibrant laugh I once knew. "We need to talk to you." Talk. The word hung suspended in the sea air that always permeated this house, mocking the vast silence that had been my constant companion for over a decade. For 12 years, these 2 individuals had systematically excised me from their world. No calls, no texts beyond the occasional automated holiday greeting, and certainly no chance to ever meet my 3 beautiful grandchildren. I had ceased to be a mother and had become merely an inconvenient truth they chose to ignore. Now, standing on the Italian marble threshold of a life built on unexpected wealth, they arrived like petitioners seeking audience with a queen they had once exiled. I studied them, cataloging the details of their weariness. Rhys, once so meticulously tailored, wore a suit that was visibly cheap and several years out of style. He kept trying to crane his neck, stretching past my shoulder to glean more glimpses of the interior wealth. Sarah wore a threadbare gray trench coat, and her hands, usually so steady and capable, were twisting the strap of a worn leather handbag. Worry had etched deep, permanent lines across her forehead, lines that mirrored the cracked glaze on the cheap porcelain bowls I used to sell my humble wares in another lifetime. "Talk," I repeated, letting the words sink slowly into the tense atmosphere. The quiet control in my voice surprised even myself. How utterly fascinating. After 12 years of complete, utter, and purposeful silence, the 2 of you suddenly find the vocabulary to request a conversation. The color visibly drained from Sarah's face. Rhys cleared his throat with a nervous, rasping sound, fiddling unnecessarily with his tie. It was clear they were coming straight from a place where hope had just been thoroughly extinguished, and I was the desperate, last-ditch attempt at rescue. The sheer, overwhelming desperation in their eyes was a raw, undeniable confession. During those long, arid years of abandonment, my survival had been anchored in the meticulous, painstaking work of antique furniture restoration. My former life as a high school principal had given way to the solitary hours spent sanding, staining, and resurrecting old, broken pieces. Every splinter I smoothed, every faded finish I revived, was a slow, deliberate act of healing my own splintered soul. My hands became calloused not from carrying heavy pies, but from wielding coarse grit sandpaper and smelling solvents instead of cinnamon. My back ached not from carrying baskets, but from hunched hours over the delicate inlay work of abandoned bureaus. Yet the pride of my craft remained unbroken. The beautiful, honest smell of aged wood, pure beeswax, and turpentine, these were the aromas of my salvation. They reminded me of the woman I was, someone who could take something damaged and make it whole, strong, and beautiful again. I remembered the early days of their marriage, before the poison fully took hold. Sarah, still my effervescent daughter, had introduced me to Reese at a company retreat. He was all practiced charm and smooth ambition, calling me Dear Victoria and praising my modest efforts, all while I now realize he was subtly laying the groundwork to sever my influence completely. The change had begun insidiously, a slow, toxic drip into the clear well of our mother-daughter bond. When Sarah suggested Sunday visits, Reese would suddenly have a mandatory client emergency. When I called, he would answer with a clipped, annoyed tone and promise that Sarah would call back, a promise that inevitably dissolved into silence. The cancellations became more frequent and more elaborate. The exclusion was first presented as an accidental oversight that stung but was forgivable. Her MBA graduation. Oh, mother, we were so sure you had other, more important plans. The baby shower for my first grandson. It was dreadfully intimate. Just her closest friends from the law firm, you know. The child's first steps, which I only saw in a shaky video on a forgotten social media account. We completely forgot to tell you. Everything was so rushed. Each lie, each fabricated excuse, was a tiny, precisely aimed stiletto to my heart. But I forced a smile, nodded, and pretended to understand. Don't worry, my darling. Next time will be different. But the next time was always the next time, and the chasm between us grew wider, deeper, and colder. The years bled into one another. I ate solitary meals in front of the flickering television, my birthdays celebrated with a single lonely candle stuck into a slice of pound cake bought from the corner bakery. The kind old man who owned it would always ask about Sarah, and I would offer the same weary lie. She's terribly busy building her new life. You know how it is when they start their own families. But now, standing here on the threshold of my magnificent cliffside sanctuary, with the ocean wind whipping secrets around the eaves and the distinct, cleansing scent of salt spray filling my lungs, I saw them with crystalline clarity. They were not my daughter and son-in-law. They were opportunists, drawn to the light of my newfound wealth like desperate moths. I finally stepped aside, inviting them in with a gesture that was both elegant and profoundly indifferent. Their eyes widened again, drinking in the sight of the Italian marble floors, the 80-inch television screen, and the carefully curated artworks that adorned the walls, each piece acquired not for investment, but for the pleasure of true beauty. Sarah trailed behind Reese like a pale shadow, her head bowed, while he appraised every costly piece of furniture, every detail of my new reality, with the poorly disguised avidity of a professional thief casing a vault. "Do sit down," I said, pointing toward the plush, oyster-colored velvet sofa that had cost more than their combined annual income from their previous comfortable life. "I assume after such a lengthy separation, you have a great deal you wish to convey to me." Reese cleared his throat, adopting the confident, important posture he always used when trying to dominate a room or a conversation. "Victoria, we know it's been a few years since we've connected, but—" 12 years, I interrupted him, my voice cutting through his rehearsed speech like a diamond scoring glass. 12 exact years since you both collectively decided I ceased to exist. Sarah finally lifted her head, and I saw tears welling in her eyes, but they held no power over me now. I had cried too many nights alone, wept until the pain dissolved into a cold, hard resolve to allow her calculated, convenient tears to manipulate me into a lapse of judgment. "Mother, it was never our intention," Sarah began, her voice cracking. "Things simply became complicated. Reese's job, the children." "The children I never met," I countered immediately, the rage that had been dormant for so long finally beginning to simmer dangerously within me. "My grandchildren who grew up without knowing the existence of a grandmother who would have loved them completely, unconditionally, and without any conditions." The memory of the preceding 12 years flashed through my mind, a desolate montage of solitude and unacknowledged effort. I had survived, not through their goodwill, but through the discipline of routine. Every morning, I rose at 5 o'clock, not to rush to the principal's office anymore, but to begin the restoration work. The care required for an antique chair leg demanded the same meticulous attention that I had once poured into raising Sarah. The careful layering of stain required patience. The precise selection of wood filler tolerated no mistake. These tasks became my spiritual anchor, my salvation, and thankfully, my modest income. My hands became calloused not from carrying heavy pies, but from wielding coarse grit sandpaper and smelling solvents instead of cinnamon. My back ached not from carrying baskets, but from hunched hours over the delicate inlay work of abandoned bureaus. Yet the pride of my craft remained unbroken. The beautiful, honest smell of aged wood, pure beeswax, and turpentine. These were the aromas of my salvation. They reminded me of the woman I was, someone who could take something damaged and make it whole, strong, and beautiful again. I remembered the early days of their marriage, before the poison fully took hold. Sarah, still my effervescent daughter, had introduced me to Reese at a company retreat. He was all practiced charm and smooth ambition, calling me Dear Victoria and praising my modest efforts, all while, I now realize, he was subtly laying the groundwork to sever my influence completely. The change had begun insidiously, a slow toxic drip into the clear well of our mother-daughter bond. When Sarah suggested Sunday visits, Reese would suddenly have a mandatory client emergency. When I called, he would answer with a clipped, annoyed tone and promise that Sarah would call back, a promise that inevitably dissolved into silence. The cancellations became more frequent and more elaborate. The exclusion was first presented as an accidental oversight that stung but was forgivable. Her MBA graduation. Oh, Mother, we were so sure you had other, more important plans. The baby shower for my first grandson. It was dreadfully intimate. Just her closest friends from the law firm, you know. The child's first steps, which I only saw in a shaky video on a forgotten social media account. We completely forgot to tell you. Everything was so rushed. Each lie, each fabricated excuse was a tiny, precisely aimed stiletto to my heart, but I forced a smile, nodded, and pretended to understand. Don't worry, my darling. Next time will be different. But the next time was always the next time, and the chasm between us grew wider, deeper, and colder. The years bled into one another. I ate solitary meals in front of the flickering television, my birthdays celebrated with a single, lonely candle stuck into a slice of pound cake bought from the corner bakery. The kind old man who owned it would always ask about Sarah, and I would offer the same weary lie. She's terribly busy building her new life. You know how it is when they start their own families. But now, standing here on the threshold of my magnificent cliffside sanctuary, with the ocean wind whipping secrets around the eaves and the distinct, cleansing scent of salt spray filling my lungs, I saw them with crystalline clarity. They were not my daughter and son-in-law. They were opportunists, drawn to the light of my newfound wealth like desperate moths. I finally stepped aside, inviting them in with a gesture that was both elegant and profoundly indifferent. Their eyes widened again, drinking in the sight of the Italian marble floors, the 80-inch television screen, and the carefully curated artworks that adorned the walls, each piece acquired not for investment, but for the pleasure of true beauty. Sarah trailed behind Reese like a pale shadow, her head bowed, while he appraised every costly piece of furniture, every detail of my new reality, with the poorly disguised avidity of a professional thief casing a vault. "Do sit down," I said, pointing toward the plush, oyster-colored velvet sofa that had cost more than their combined annual income from their previous comfortable life. "I assume after such a lengthy separation, you have a great deal you wish to convey to me." Reese cleared his throat, adopting the confident, important posture he always used when trying to dominate a room or a conversation. "Victoria, we know it's been a few years since we've connected, but—" 12 years, I interrupted him, my voice cutting through his rehearsed speech like a diamond scoring glass. 12 exact years since you both collectively decided I ceased to exist. Sarah finally lifted her head, and I saw tears welling in her eyes, but they held no power over me now. I had cried too many nights alone, wept until the pain dissolved into a cold, hard resolve to allow her calculated, convenient tears to manipulate me into a lapse of judgment. "Mother, it was never our intention," Sarah began, her voice cracking. "Things simply became complicated. Reese's job, the children I never met," I countered immediately, the rage that had been dormant for so long finally beginning to simmer dangerously within me. "My grandchildren who grew up without knowing the existence of a grandmother who would have loved them completely, unconditionally, and without any conditions. The weekends, instead of being filled with family dinners, were spent at the city's antique market. It was there, among the dusty relics and forgotten treasures, that I found my new chosen family. Evelyn, a retired librarian who sold vintage books, became my closest confidant. She, too, had been discarded by her children after they married and began prioritizing their own status over their parents' love. Evelyn understood the quiet devastation of becoming invisible to those who were once the very center of your universe. They believe that once they've secured their own comfort and position, Evelyn told me one afternoon, her voice gentle yet firm, we, the parents, cease to matter. But the moment they stumble, the instant the financial ground shifts, then they suddenly recall our telephone number. How prophetically true that sentiment felt now, watching Sarah nervously twisting her fingers while Reese, only a few feet away, performed a silent, mental inventory of my expensive surroundings. Sarah's transformation had been gradual, almost imperceptible until it was complete. In the first few years of her marriage to Reese, she still called occasionally, but the conversations were increasingly superficial, brittle with awkward silence. Reese was always present in the background, making a sharp, audible sigh or interjecting comments that sliced our conversations short. "Your mother always manages to bring the drama," I overheard him say once, mistakenly believing Sarah had hung up the phone. "My mother never burdens us with her personal problems." Personal problems. That was Reese's clinical classification for my simple loneliness, my natural desire to maintain a connection with my only daughter, my desperate need to be a part of their evolving family structure. Everything I felt, everything I hoped for, was reduced to mere emotional noise that disturbed the serenity of their supposedly perfect married life. The invitations, to Thanksgiving, to Christmas, to the children's annual school plays, dwindled, then vanished entirely. "This year will be intimate, Mother. Just the 4 of us," she'd explained for Thanksgiving. "Then Christmas. The children are battling a terrible flu. We must postpone our plans. Then the birthdays. Everything has become complicated with Reese's workload. Each flimsy excuse was delivered with an accompanying, empty promise of a next time that never materialized. Sarah developed an astonishing talent for packaging every rejection in a tone of caring consideration. Every exclusion was framed as temporary, and every act of abandonment was spun as being for my own ultimate benefit. "We truly don't want you to feel obligated to travel, Mother," she'd assured me once. "You're at an age where you should simply rest and enjoy your tranquility." My tranquility. As if I had willingly asked for this profound, aching solitude. As if waking up every morning in a silent apartment, surrounded only by unfinished wood and the ghosts of my memories, was my definition of happiness. The years drifted by like forgotten leaves in a slow, muddy stream. My routine became so predictable that even the elderly doorman of my apartment building knew exactly which days I would be working on which phase of restoration. Monday, preparing the delicate veneer repairs. Tuesday, mixing custom stains. Wednesday, applying the first coat of varnish to my hotcakes, the pieces that sold instantly. Thursday, deep cleaning my tools. Friday, arranging transport for the weekly market. And Sunday, the market itself, the conversations with Evelyn, the small transactions that temporarily filled the immense void in my chest, but the emptiness still found a way to assert itself. There were nights of such profound, suffocating loneliness that I truly felt I might drown in the silence. Hours spent staring at the dead telephone, willing it to ring, waiting for a text that never arrived, Christmases celebrated with nothing but old movies and a tiny, artificial tabletop tree I decorated alone, its lights mocking the darkness outside. The most acute pain always struck at the most unexpected moments. Seeing a whole family laughing in a park, overhearing other grandmothers discussing their grandchildren's latest antics, passing a toy store and wondering which brightly colored thing my 3 unknown grandchildren would prefer. Sarah had 3 children, 2 boys and a girl, and I knew them only through heavily filtered social media photos, which I viewed from a fake account, feeling like a spy in my own estranged family's life. "Mother!" Sarah's voice, thick with genuine despair now, yanked me back to the present. "We know we have made mistakes." Mistakes? The word detonated from my lips with the force of a bullet. Erasing your mother from your existence for 12 years was a mistake? Denying your children the love of their only living grandmother was a mere mistake? Reese shifted uncomfortably on the luxurious sofa, finally grasping that this conversation was not proceeding according to his carefully drafted, manipulative script. His gaze continued to dart around the living room, calculating the value, evaluating the risk, planning his next move like the expert predator he had always been. "They were not mistakes," I continued, feeling the absolute, undiluted truth pour from my throat like molten glass after years of being contained and pressurized. "They were conscious, calculated, and deeply cruel decisions. You chose to discard me as if I were an old piece of furniture that had simply outlived its usefulness." Sarah began to sob, but the tears, though real, were powerless to dismantle the fortress I had built around my heart. I had wept alone for too many years, questioning what fundamental flaw in my nature had caused this estrangement, wondering how my unconditional love had utterly failed to keep my own daughter tethered to me. "Mother, please let us explain," Sarah pleaded through her tears. "Explain what precisely?" My voice rose, finally breaking the rigid calmness I had held. "Are you going to explain why I missed your eldest's first words? Why I wasn't there when your youngest started kindergarten? Why I spent 12 Christmases creating a solitary feast while you built joyful family memories from which I was expressly excluded?" Reese finally intervened, using the same patronizing, condescending tone he had perfected over the years. "Victoria, we understand you feel wounded, but sometimes families require a necessary distance to properly grow. It was nothing inherently personal against you." The laugh that tore from my throat was sharp, bitter, and utterly devoid of humor. "Nothing personal, Reese. You deliberately manufactured distance between a mother and her child. You planted seeds of doubt and poison in her heart against me. You unilaterally decided that my very existence had no place in the perfect life you were engineering." I recalled with painful, vivid clarity the day Sarah communicated her final, cold decision. It was a cold, relentless Tuesday in October, precisely 12 years prior. She arrived at my modest apartment with an expression I had never witnessed on her face before. Cold, distant, and utterly devoid of genuine affection, as if she were merely executing an unpleasant, contractual obligation. "Mother, Reese and I have been discussing things," she began, refusing the mug of the Earl Grey tea I had automatically prepared, a ritual we had shared since she was a teenager. "We believe it would be best for you to have significantly less contact with us for the foreseeable future." "Less contact?" I had asked, feeling the familiar secure ground beneath my feet begin to liquefy. "What precisely does less contact truly entail?" "It means you are no longer welcome to simply stop by our house unannounced," she stated, her voice unnaturally flat. "It means we need you to stop the constant calls. It means we need space to function as a unified family without external interference." External interference. That was the term my own flesh and blood daughter had chosen to describe me. As if I were a meddling neighbor, a complete stranger who had no business concerning herself with their affairs. Not her mother, the woman who had carried her for 9 months, who had spent countless sleepless nights nursing her through childhood illnesses, who had worked double shifts at the school to ensure her college tuition was covered. Sarah, my love, I genuinely don't understand what I have done wrong, where I have fundamentally failed you, I had pleaded, my voice splintering with the raw, intense pain. She remained rigid, impassive. "It's not about what you've done wrong, Mother. It's about what is ultimately best for my marriage and the children's stability. Reese needs to know that I prioritize our nuclear family above absolutely everyone else. Anyone else. That was my classification now. I had been relegated to the category of anyone else. But Sarah, I am your mother. I am the children's grandmother. I am not some external threat to your marriage, I insisted, desperate to claw back some semblance of logic. Reese believes that mothers-in-law inevitably cause unnecessary friction in young marriages. He says it's crucial to establish absolutely clear boundaries right from the start. Reese believes, Reese thinks, Reese dictates. My daughter's voice, her very thoughts, had been subtly replaced by an echo of his will. Her independent, generous heart had been meticulously reprogrammed to beat only to the rhythm he set. And what about what you say, Sarah? What about what you think? Where is your heart in this decision? She remained completely silent for a prolonged, agonizing minute. For a fleeting moment, I dared to hope that the daughter I had raised with such fierce, protective love would return to me. But when she finally spoke, her voice was hollow, meticulously rehearsed, as if she were reciting lines from a pre-written cold script. I think Reese is absolutely correct. I believe this is for the best, for all of us, including you, Mother. You can finally have your own life without constantly having to concern yourself with us. That was the last true, honest conversation we ever had. After that day, Sarah transformed into a ghost, occasionally sending brief, sterile text messages. Hope you are well, Mother. Happy birthday. Happy New Year. They were automatic, soulless messages, devoid of genuine love, chillingly similar to the generic, impersonal notes a corporation sends to its inactive clients. The first few months following that definitive break were the darkest, most desolate period of my entire life. I lost weight rapidly. I lost all ability to sleep soundly. I lost almost all hope. Every morning I would wake, half expecting the nightmare to lift, for Sarah to call and apologize, for everything to revert to the comforting, flawed reality of the past. But the telephone remained as silent as a grave, and the cold, unyielding reality grew heavier and more suffocating with each passing day. It was Evelyn who physically saved me from descending completely into paralyzing depression. She arrived at my door one dreary Sunday morning, finding me in bed for the third consecutive day, having done nothing but stare at the ceiling. "Victoria, you must get up. You have two very simple choices," Evelyn said, pulling back the dusty curtains with determined hands. "You can choose to remain here, literally dying while still alive, mourning a daughter who does not deserve you, or you can begin the arduous, brave work of building a new, self-respecting life that is entirely worthy of the woman you are." Her words were harsh, blunt, and completely without sentimentality, but they carried the undeniable, restorative force of truth. That same afternoon, Evelyn helped me clean my apartment, meticulously organize my restoration tools, and draft a realistic, achievable business plan for my antique business. "If you are going to suffer this profound pain," Evelyn instructed me, as we mixed the first batch of wood stain I had touched in weeks, "do it while simultaneously creating something of lasting value." And so, my new life began. Slowly, agonizingly, but with a fierce, unbreakable determination. Every piece of furniture I successfully restored was a massive step toward my complete emotional independence. Every single satisfied customer was a small, personal, internal victory. Every dollar I earned was a concrete, tangible proof that I still possessed immense value, even if my own daughter was incapable of seeing or acknowledging it. The market days became my weekly necessary therapy session. The collectors, the dealers, and especially the other older women who bought my smaller, more intricate restored pieces became my new self-selected family. We shared stories of ungrateful children, of marriages that fractured families, and the pervasive loneliness of being a mother in a modern world that seems to swiftly discard you the moment you are no longer immediately useful to their narrative. My son dismisses me as too dramatic when I dare to complain that he never visits, Joanna, a woman who collected Victorian-era picture frames, told me one Saturday. But it isn't drama, Victoria. It's legitimate, profound pain. It is the fundamental, human need to feel loved and continuously valued by the very people you sacrificed everything to bring into this world. Now, sitting here in my magnificent living room, a space that cost significantly more than every material possession Sarah and Reese owned combined, I recalled every agonizing tear, every dark, silent night, every lonely birthday, and I saw them there, two small, visibly desperate figures, grasping for a lifeline after turning their backs on me for more than a decade. So, after 12 years of absolute silence, I said, my voice meticulously controlled, what single, compelling factor has now driven you to my door? Reese and Sarah exchanged a brief, meaningful look, a silent argument over which of them would deliver the rehearsed lie. Finally, Reese cleared his throat again, adopting a tone of contrived gravitas. Victoria, the simple truth is that we are currently navigating an extremely difficult financial period. An extremely difficult financial period. I repeated his perfectly calibrated words slowly, deliberately savoring the deep irony of the moment as if it were a sip of bitter, burning liquor. What an absolutely extraordinary coincidence that you choose to seek me out only now, when you are in dire need. After 12 years of consciously deeming my existence entirely irrelevant to your supposedly perfect, self-contained lives. Reese visibly shifted on the expensive sofa, clearly preparing the elaborate, multi-layered speech he had undoubtedly rehearsed relentlessly during the long, anxious drive to my house. His eyes avoided mine, nervously scanning the intricate ceiling cornices as he formulated the precise words he calculated would be enough to soften my supposedly brittle, grandmotherly heart. My consulting firm, he finally confessed, his voice dropping to a theatrical whisper of shame. It dissolved completely 6 months ago. We lost every penny of our savings. The house in Westchester is now officially in foreclosure proceedings. Sarah immediately nodded desperately, as if the mere confirmation of their misfortune would magically trigger an automatic surge of maternal compassion within me. Reese has been unable to secure a comparable position. I had to resign from my job to take on full-time childcare because we simply cannot afford daycare any longer. We are currently living in a spare room at my parents' house, but they, too, are grappling with their own significant financial challenges. Mother, Sarah added, her voice cracking with manufactured guilt. The children keep asking why they no longer have their own rooms, why Daddy is constantly furious, why Mommy cries silently every single night. We are at a complete loss. We don't know what to do next. Ah, I said, leaning back into the luxurious, custom-designed velvet armchair, making myself utterly comfortable. So suddenly I am useful once more. Now I am deemed to exist. Now, I am officially considered a part of the family dynamic. How exceptionally convenient for both of you. During those 12 years of emotional ostracism, I had developed a razor-sharp ability to read the minute gaps between the lines, to instantly detect the precise cadence of emotional manipulation, and, most importantly, to construct an impenetrable defense against people who only ever approached when their hands were completely empty and their needs were urgent. The women in my support group, led by the astute Evelyn, had taught me a painful but essential truth. Children often only reappear on their parents' doorstep when the harsh, unforgiving realities of life finally defeat them, not out of any genuine rediscovered love, but purely out of stark, calculated convenience. It truly isn't like that, Mother, Sarah protested, her voice already cracking under the immense pressure. I have always deeply loved you. I have always thought about you constantly. It was simply the insurmountable circumstances. The circumstances. Let us discuss the nature of these circumstances, Sarah, I interrupted her, my voice suddenly devoid of all warmth. When your eldest son was hospitalized with severe pneumonia 8 years ago, where was I? When your middle child broke his arm in a playground accident 5 years ago, did you feel the slightest urge to call me? When your youngest daughter was struggling with extreme anxiety at school last year, did the thought of seeking advice from her grandmother ever cross your mind? Each question was a perfectly aimed arrow, piercing the protective shield of her guilt. Sarah physically paled with the acknowledgement of each one because she knew the unvarnished, brutal answer was universally the same. She had deliberately chosen not to include me in a single difficult or necessary moment of their lives. Only now, when they were absolutely desperate for a large injection of cash, when their world was utterly crumbling around them, had they finally recalled the mere fact that they still possessed a mother? We knew, truthfully, that you were struggling financially, Reese muttered, attempting to justify their inexcusable neglect with an astonishing display of gall. We genuinely didn't wish to be an additional burden on you when you were barely able to support yourself by restoring old junk. The sheer, breathtaking audacity of his statement silenced me for a fleeting, powerful moment. Not only had they coolly justified my complete exclusion based on my perceived poverty, but now he possessed the unmitigated nerve to openly admit it, as if poverty was a valid, justifiable reason to permanently abandon a person who loved you unconditionally. I see, I said with a quiet calm that astonished even me. So I was deemed insufficiently useful for you when I was poor and struggling. Yet now that you have presumably ascertained my new, massive financial situation, I have suddenly become valuable enough to warrant a personal visit. The absolute truth behind my sudden, monumental economic transformation was something they could never have accurately fathomed. 3 months prior, while meticulously repairing a badly damaged 18th century dresser, I had received a life-altering telephone call. It was a lawyer representing the estate of my great-aunt Penelope, a deeply eccentric, distant relative of my late father who had relocated to Geneva 50 years ago and had entirely vanished from our family's knowledge. Great-aunt Penelope had been the family's enigmatic black sheep, the one who left in pursuit of an unconventional dream and never once looked back. For decades, all we ever received were the occasional, heavily postmarked Christmas cards featuring Swiss Alps scenery, but we never truly grasped how she had fared in her solitary life. As it turned out, she had fared absolutely sensationally. She had been an immensely successful but deeply private international rare coin dealer. Her inheritance, entirely bequeathed to me, included a massive, highly sought-after collection of ancient Roman and Greek coins. The sale of these coins, after meticulous authentication and auction, had netted me a staggering total of $11 million. Overnight, I had transitioned from painfully counting pennies to purchase raw materials for my workshop to possessing a fortune far exceeding anything I had ever dared to dream of owning. But the real transformative value of that inheritance was not the sheer volume of cash. It was the profoundly personal handwritten letter Great-aunt Penelope had left, specifically addressed to me. In that letter, she disclosed that she had quietly, secretly followed my life through a distant contact. She had witnessed through second-hand accounts my slow, agonizing loneliness, the brutal abandonment by my family, and my tenacious, daily struggle to simply survive with dignity. She explained in the beautiful, flowing script of a woman who had lived 100 lives, that she had decided to leave me everything because she recognized in me the same exact, tenacious spirit she herself had possessed, a strong, underestimated woman who had been discarded and alienated by her own relatives, yet who had stubbornly refused to ever surrender. "Victoria," the letter had commanded, "I have seen the way your daughter has treated you. I have observed your grace, your loneliness, and your unwavering dignity. This money is intended for you to finally live your remaining years as the queen you have always been internally, not as the forgotten pauper they desperately wished you to become." With that sudden, immense financial windfall, I had instantly purchased this massive, historic house perched dramatically by the sea. A sanctuary where I could wake every morning to the restorative sound of the crashing waves and inhale the clean, invigorating air, completely free from the toxic weight of painful memories and manipulative people. For the first time in 12 years, I slept a deep, completely untroubled sleep. "Mother," Sarah tried to move toward me again, but I subtly raised my hand, a small, definitive gesture that halted her immediate progress. "I know we made truly awful mistakes. I know we hurt you in unforgivable ways, but we are still family. We are bound by blood." "Blood!" I repeated the word, letting it fall from my lips like something worthless. "Sarah." Blood, on its own, means absolutely nothing without the foundational elements of mutual respect, genuine love, and continuous consideration. You consciously reduced our entire family connection into a meaningless, soggy piece of paper that you contemptuously tossed into the refuse bin the moment it no longer conveniently served your purposes. Reese leaned forward, adopting a posture of calculated, theatrical vulnerability, a position he had undoubtedly spent hours perfecting in front of a mirror. Victoria, we absolutely understand your immense pain. We understand your profound anger, but the innocent children are completely outside of all of this. They truly do not deserve to suffer and pay the ultimate price for our errors. There it was, the ultimate desperate card he had deliberately saved for the final moment. The children, my 3 unknown grandchildren, the most potent, powerful form of emotional manipulation he still possessed in his shrunken arsenal. They knew, intuitively, that referencing the welfare of the little ones was the single easiest way to soften a grandmother's heart, a heart that had been painstakingly hardened by 12 years of sustained neglect. The children? I questioned, allowing a measured mix of genuine maternal pain and fierce protective rage to surface in my voice. The very children who were deliberately denied the existence of a grandmother who would have loved, taught, and cared for them unconditionally. The same children who were robbed of my love, my wisdom, and my support for all these vital, formative years. Sarah began to sob again, but this time her tears seemed heavier, more genuine, weighed down by the crushing gravity of a real, sudden influx of guilt. Mother, we simply did not consider the long-term devastating consequences, Sarah stammered, covering her face. Reese kept insisting it was better for the marriage, that mothers-in-law inevitably caused severe relationship problems. Reese insisted, I corrected her instantly. But you chose to allow it to happen. And now that the consequences of that choice have resulted in your total financial ruin, you have finally found your path back to my doorstep. My voice was lost somewhere deep between the empty promises of a perfect marriage and the paralyzing fear of actively contradicting my husband. Sarah admitted, her words carrying a moment of raw, painful honesty that temporarily disarmed me. But Mother, I realize now the catastrophic magnitude of everything we intentionally forfeited. The children keep asking why they do not have a grandmother, Sarah whispered, the phrase hanging in the air like a poisoned dart. Because their friends constantly discuss their own grandmothers, and they have absolutely no one to speak of. Her words were daggers straight to my soul. But I had learned through arduous effort not to permit pain to ever cloud my superior judgment. For 12 years, I had obsessively fantasized about this exact confrontation. Sarah's penitent return, the raw acknowledgement of her profound error, the faint, flickering possibility of finally meeting my grandchildren. But now that it was actually unfolding, I recognized with chilling clarity that it was arriving far too late and, most damningly, for the most expedient, wrong reasons. Do you possess any idea how many of my grandchildren's birthdays I was forced to miss while you were meticulously constructing your perfect family without any external interference? I demanded, my voice hardening significantly with each word. Do you know how many nights I stayed awake, agonizingly imagining their unique voices, their distinctive laughs, their individual personalities? Do you know how many perfectly age-appropriate toys I purchased and then mournfully stored in a sealed box, desperately waiting for a day that never ever came? Reese shifted even more nervously, visibly uncomfortable with the rapidly escalating, unfavorable direction of the conversation. His predetermined plan of gentle, calculated emotional softening was failing spectacularly, and I could practically observe him mentally calculating his next, more aggressive manipulative maneuver. "Victoria, we understand you feel tremendously wounded," he intervened, using the same condescending clinical voice he had mastered over the years. "But now, we possess the absolute ability to fundamentally change all of that. The children can meet you now. They can spend quality time with you. We can seamlessly become a unified family once more." A family? I repeated the word, savoring the bitter taste of his hypocrisy. "Do you mean the specific kind of family?" where the grandmother is only grudgingly welcomed the very instant she possesses millions of dollars to conveniently solve the overwhelming, self-inflicted problems of two profoundly irresponsible adults. The living room was suddenly filled with an immense, stifling silence. Through the large panoramic windows, I could observe the Atlantic waves continuously breaking against the jagged, gray rocks below, a constant rhythmic reminder of my hard-won, total independence and my self-made, new freedom. This magnificent house, this serene life, represented everything I had deliberately achieved without them. Everything I had painstakingly rebuilt from the emotional ashes of their brutal abandonment. In the 3 months since relocating to the sea, I had established an entirely new, deeply fulfilling routine. I woke each day to the genuine, natural sound of the cawing seagulls, not the silent, desperate cry of profound loneliness. I prepared my coffee in a professional-grade kitchen, equipped with the finest appliances, a stark contrast to the cramped, dark space where I once had to count every single penny for basic restoration materials. I now walked along the isolated, windswept beach every sunset, feeling the cool, clean sand between my toes and the invigorating, salty wind in my hair, completely liberated from the crushing, oppressive emotional weight I had carried for so many years. I had also actively begun volunteering my time, helping other older women who, like me, had been viciously cast aside by their own adult children. Evelyn had permanently moved into a smaller apartment very near my house, and together we had established a small private support group for ladies in heartbreakingly similar situations. Every Wednesday afternoon, we would convene right here in my sun-drenched living room, sharing stories of emotional survival, coping strategies, and, of course, the comforting aroma of freshly brewed tea. True freedom, Victoria, Evelyn had wisely told me during one of our meetings, is the liberating realization that you do not require the approval, the presence, or the validation of those who intentionally hurt you to find and maintain your own happiness. Her powerful words had resonated within my heart like the definitive tolling of a great, undeniable bell of truth. For the first time in literal decades, I was living purely for myself. I was no longer passively waiting for non-existent telephone calls. I was no longer cooking or preparing for children who intentionally refused to visit. I was no longer desperately dreaming of impossible family reunions that existed solely within the confines of my own anguished imagination. Mother, Sarah approached the absolute edge of my armchair, her eyes intensely red and swollen from crying. I know with complete certainty that I do not deserve your forgiveness. I know that I absolutely do not deserve a second chance from you, but I swear to you, on the life and well-being of my children, that if you would only help us now, everything will be fundamentally different. Different how, Sarah? I inquired, deliberately keeping my voice cold, calm, and utterly controlled. Different only until you successfully resolve your immediate financial problems and no longer require my assistance? Different only until Reese once again decides that my presence constitutes an unacceptable interference in his supposedly perfect marriage. Reese suddenly stood up, his movement abrupt and aggressive, finally allowing his true, ugly nature to pierce through the fragile facade when he fully realized his calculated manipulation strategy had utterly failed. Look, Victoria, I readily understand that you harbor profound resentments, he exploded, his voice losing its forced composure. But the inescapable reality is that everyone makes honest mistakes within family dynamics. The truly important thing is to move forward decisively, not to remain obsessively stuck in the past. His profoundly dismissive comment was like a cold, sharp slap across my face. After 12 years of deliberate, cruel abandonment, he possessed the astonishing arrogance to minimize my deep, legitimate pain as merely being stuck in the past, as if my immense, agonizing suffering were a whimsical, voluntary choice rather than the direct, unavoidable consequence of their calculated, cruel actions. Move forward? I stood up from my opulent armchair, instantly feeling every ounce of my reclaimed dignity rise within me like an unyielding steel tower. Reese, I have already moved forward decisively. I constructed a brand new, fulfilling life entirely without either of you. I located profound peace without your toxic presence. I finally discovered my true, immense self-worth without needing your conditional validation. Sarah instantly covered her face with her trembling hands, sobbing with a deep, consuming desperation that would have shattered my heart years ago. But the heart they had once known had deliberately been allowed to perish slowly, over 12 long years of corrosive indifference, and it had been reborn as something infinitely stronger, infinitely wiser, and terrifyingly more selective with its precious, finite capacity for love. You genuinely do not understand, do you? I continued, walking slowly toward the enormous window overlooking the powerful ocean. You arrived here with the firm expectation of finding the exact broken woman you callously abandoned 12 years ago. You fully expected to find someone so pathetically desperate for any form of family love that she would willingly pay any exorbitant price for a few meager crumbs of forced affection. The chilling truth was that during the first several years immediately following their abandonment, I would indeed have been absolutely willing to pay any price asked. I would have willingly mortgaged my entire lonely soul for a single, unsolicited phone call from Sarah. I would have instantly sold every single possession I owned for just one afternoon spent with my grandchildren. I would have groveled and begged for forgiveness for offenses I had never even committed, all for the slender chance of being grudgingly reincorporated back into their lives. But the immense passage of time and the profound depth of the pain had taught me invaluable, difficult lessons about fundamental self-love and absolute personal dignity. The shared afternoons with Evelyn and the other wise, strong women had conclusively demonstrated that family abandonment was tragically more common than I had previously imagined, and that surviving it was not only entirely possible, but could ultimately become the genesis of a far more authentic and deeply satisfying life. For so many years I blamed only myself, I confessed, my gaze still fixed on the endless, powerful ocean. I believed that I had failed as a mother, that I had been unnecessarily overbearing, excessively present, too intensely loving. I tortured my own mind, trying to locate the exact, precise moment I had fundamentally lost my daughter. I finally turned to face them directly, and I could clearly perceive how my powerful, unvarnished words were affecting them in profoundly different ways. Sarah appeared truly devastated, as if she were finally, suddenly grasping the full, horrifying magnitude of the permanent emotional damage they had collectively inflicted. Reese, conversely, exhibited clear signs of mounting impatience and intense frustration, his eyes openly calculating whether it was still worth continuing this emotionally charged strategy, or if he should immediately attempt a radically different approach. But eventually, I finally comprehended the simple truth, I continued, letting the silence draw out. I did not lose my daughter because of some flaw or action of my own. I lost her because she deliberately chose a man who perceived the mere existence of a present mother-in-law as an unacceptable threat to his profoundly fragile masculinity. I lost her because she ultimately valued her controlling husband's approval more than she valued her mother's eternal love. Sarah instantly stood up, swaying slightly, as if my words were physical blows that had momentarily unbalanced her. Mother, it is absolutely not like that. I genuinely never stopped loving you. I simply became profoundly confused. Reese skillfully manipulated you, I corrected her instantly, but you chose to allow it to happen. And now that the consequences of that choice have resulted in your total financial ruin, you have finally found your path back to my doorstep. What I currently desire is something you probably lack the capacity to give, I stated, allowing a deep sadness to color my voice. Authentic, genuine respect, unconditional love that is not predicated on convenience, and the necessary acknowledgement that you spent 12 years treating my entire existence as if it were nothing more than worthless garbage. Sarah slowly rose from the expensive sofa, her movements unsteady, deliberately approaching me with her hands outstretched, as if she desperately wished to touch me, yet utterly lacked the courage to do so. Mother, I can give you that now. I truly do recognize the profound, devastating harm we have inflicted upon you, she pleaded. I have spent these last few months constantly awake at night, agonizingly recalling every cruel, dismissive moment, every unanswered phone call, every invitation I intentionally failed to send. These last few months, I interrupted, my internal alarm bell immediately ringing, noting the suspiciously specific nature of her confession. What precisely occurred exactly 3 months ago that suddenly triggered this convenient, spontaneous recollection that you possessed an abandoned mother? The color instantly drained from her face, as if she had been instantly caught in a monumental, damning lie. Reese shot her a sharp, warning glare, but it was already far too late. I had successfully detected the profound inconsistency in her carefully fabricated narrative of convenient, sudden repentance. Sarah stammered, frantically searching for a plausible, immediate verbal escape. You found out about the inheritance. I completed the inescapable sentence for her, feeling every last intricate piece of the complex puzzle click perfectly into place. Someone, somewhere, informed you about my massive new house, about my immense new financial standing. That is the true single reason you are currently here. Not out of genuine love, not out of any true heartfelt remorse, but entirely because you successfully discovered that the mother you contemptuously abandoned now possesses $11 million. Reese desperately attempted to seize immediate control of the rapidly deteriorating situation again, but his flimsy mask of vulnerability had now completely disintegrated. Victoria, that is simply untrue. Of course, we unfortunately heard about your sudden good fortune, and we are genuinely pleased to know you are thriving. But we primarily came because why, Reese? Because you are completely and utterly broke, I interrupted, my voice now cutting with the cold, surgical precision of a blade. You came here because you desperately require money, and I am your final, utterly desperate resort. You came because you coldly calculated that 12 years of brutal abandonment could be instantly expiated with a few well-executed tears and vague, utterly empty promises of immediate reconciliation. Reese had remained pointedly silent for the last several minutes, but I could visually observe his sharp mind working furiously, calculating, evaluating, and desperately searching for a new, effective angle of attack. He finally spoke, adopting a radically different tone, more direct, utterly transactional, and completely devoid of any attempt at emotional manipulation. Look, Victoria, let us finally be absolutely honest here, he stated, his voice now flat and pragmatic. We desperately require financial assistance. You possess the necessary funds. We are undeniably family, despite our acknowledged problems in the past. Isn't it a natural, fundamental principle for family members to mutually assist each other during a time of extreme difficulty? His sudden, brutal honesty was almost surprisingly refreshing after so much poorly executed saccharine emotional manipulation. At least finally, we were speaking clearly and directly about the actual single thing they truly wanted from me. It is truly fascinating that you invoke the noble concept of family helping each other, I replied with a tight, deliberate smile that contained absolutely no warmth whatsoever. Where precisely was that family philosophy when I was actively working 14 hours a day restoring old furniture just to survive? Where was that essential family solidarity when I was forced to decide between purchasing necessary medication or buying food? Do you know the single most pathetic aspect of this entire confrontation? I continued, allowing years of suppressed pain to crystallize into a cold, devastating clarity that cut like a scalpel. That if you had arrived here just 1 year ago, when I was still residing in that tiny, cramped apartment, when I was still meticulously counting spare change to purchase restoration supplies, I would have probably welcomed you with immediate open arms. I would have wept intensely with genuine joy. I would have instantly forgiven everything without a single condition. I would have worked myself to the point of utter collapse just to feed you. Sarah instantly covered her face with her trembling hands, her now genuine sobs accompanied by a profound, full-body tremor that vividly demonstrated the sheer magnitude of her desperation. Reese, on the other hand, had adopted an even more tense, rigid posture, resembling a trapped, cornered animal desperately evaluating its final escape options. But the money unexpectedly gifted me something I never, ever possessed during those 12 years of brutal abandonment, I continued. walking slowly through my opulent living room like an impartial judge delivering a final, definitive sentence. It gifted me invaluable perspective. It granted me the immense, liberating freedom to autonomously choose precisely who truly deserves to be permanently in my life and who absolutely does not. Most importantly, it gave me the absolute, unassailable power to say no without harboring any fear of the painful consequences. During my initial few weeks living in this mansion, I had spent countless, solitary hours deliberately reflecting on this exact potential possibility. What would be my precise course of action if Sarah and Reese suddenly appeared at my front door? How would I realistically react? Would I possess the necessary strength to maintain my dignity, or would I utterly crumble at the first, enticing opportunity to regain my daughter? Evelyn had served as my calm, rational counselor during those deep, unsettling reflections. Money, in itself, does not magically transform who you are at your absolute core, Evelyn had wisely told me as we peacefully drank tea on my expansive, sun-drenched terrace. But it fundamentally alters how other people perceive you, and, most crucially, how you perceive yourself. The essential question now is, are you going to utilize that new, immense perspective to become fundamentally wiser? Or are you going to repeat the exact same, devastating emotional errors of your past? Her words had proven chillingly prophetic. Now, directly facing the precise scenario we had so calmly discussed, I realized that the money had indeed fundamentally changed me. But certainly not in the convenient, transactional way Sarah and Reese had so confidently anticipated. It had not made me suddenly more forgiving or more unconditionally generous toward those who had purposefully hurt me. It had made me terrifyingly more selective about who was truly worthy of my finite time and my precious, guarded emotional energy. "Mother," Sarah attempted to approach me once more, "I truly understand your immense anger. I understand your deep pain. But do you not sincerely believe that every single person deserves at least a second chance? Do you not believe that true family love possesses the inherent ability to transcend any past mistake, no matter how catastrophic? A second chance?" I repeated, deliberately savoring the deep, cutting irony of her plea. "Sarah, you were deliberately afforded thousands of opportunities over 12 long years to rectify your colossal mistake. Every single day you woke up was a fresh opportunity to call your mother. Every birthday, every Christmas, every single Mother's Day was a poignant opportunity to consciously remember that you had a mother who loved you completely unconditionally." Reese shifted restlessly, his eyes betraying his internal conflict. Should he aggressively intervene, or allow Sarah to continue with her failing strategy of emotional appeal? His eyes continued their frantic scan of my house, visibly evaluating, calculating, and likely estimating the precise amount of cash he might require to definitively solve his overwhelming problems and how much they could realistically dare to ask for without appearing excessively greedy. The defining difference between a true second chance and a pathetic 100th chance, I continued, my voice firm, is that second chances are genuinely offered out of love. 100th chances are exclusively granted out of extreme mutual desperation. You are not currently here because you have rediscovered your love for me. You are here because of your immediate, paralyzing financial desperation. Sarah completely slumped back onto the sofa, as if my words were physical blows that had utterly exhausted her. "You are correct," she whispered, her voice broken and raw. "You are absolutely chillingly correct. We are terrible, selfish hypocrites. We are precisely everything you say we are." Her sudden, profound admission of complete guilt might have been deeply moving, were it not accompanied by the obvious, underlying expectation that the mere act of acknowledging their failures would automatically result in my immediate forgiveness and, far more importantly, my massive financial intervention. "Acknowledging your catastrophic mistakes is merely the necessary first step, Sarah," I explained with the patient, weary tone of a tutor explaining basic, simple concepts to a particularly slow student. "The second and far more difficult step is accepting the painful, unalterable consequences of those mistakes. And the devastating consequences of intentionally abandoning your own mother for 12 years do not simply evaporate into thin air just because you are now in urgent need of money. I deliberately walked into the kitchen and began preparing a fresh pot of coffee, not because I had any intention of prolonging this painful visit, but because I acutely needed a small private moment to process the sheer, stunning surrealism of the entire situation. After so many agonizing years of desperately dreaming of this reunion, the brutal reality was far colder, far more transactional, and profoundly more calculated than my hopeful imagination had ever dared to conjure. While the strong coffee was brewing, I could clearly hear urgent, hissed whispers exchanged between Sarah and Reese in the living room. I couldn't distinguish the exact words, but the distinct tone was aggressively strategic and entirely focused on negotiation. They were quickly recalibrating their failed approach, frantically searching for a new, functional angle of emotional manipulation. I returned moments later with a silver tray containing only a single immaculate cup of coffee. I sat back down in my favorite armchair and began to slowly sip the hot beverage, observing them with the detached, clinical interest of a scientist studying specimens trapped in a sterile laboratory. "Are you not going to extend the courtesy of offering us coffee?" Reese finally asked, clearly irritated by my blatant disregard for traditional expected hospitality. "No," I replied simply, my gaze unwavering. "This is not a social call of reconciliation. This is purely a negotiation, and in any negotiation, the provision of hospitality implies an equality of position. We are fundamentally not in equal positions." Sarah appeared genuinely hurt by my calculated coldness, but Reese betrayed an expression of grudging, reluctant respect, as if he were finally, truly starting to understand that the powerful woman sitting before him was entirely different from the subservient, easily dismissed figure they had abandoned 12 years ago. "All right then," Reese stated, adopting the most direct, aggressive tone he had used all afternoon. "Let's speak in pure transactional terms. We require precisely $100,000 to immediately save the family home and properly start over. We know you have the money. We know we are technically family. What precise magical words do you need to hear right now to compel you to help us?" His question was so chillingly transactional, so utterly devoid of any genuine human emotion, that it nearly made me burst out laughing. He had successfully reduced 12 years of profound family abandonment and subsequent suffering to a simple, crude business negotiation. What exact, precise combination of words did he believe would instantly grant him access to my enormous wealth? "What I currently need to hear," I replied, after taking a long, deliberate sip of my coffee, "is the full, unvarnished truth about the actual reason you deliberately excluded me from your lives, not the sugar-coated, flimsy versions about youthful mistakes or external influences. I require the brutal, absolute truth." Sarah and Reese exchanged another significant glance. It was obvious they had pre-rehearsed several potential versions of their story, but none had included the kind of surgical, demanding honesty I was now insisting upon. "The truth," Sarah finally murmured, her voice barely audible, "is that Reese convinced me that you were consistently problematic for our marriage." "Problematic how, exactly?" I pressed, unwilling to allow her to hide behind vague, comfortable euphemisms. Reese instantly took the floor, likely realizing that Sarah's victim strategy was completely ineffective. "I perceived you as being too aggressively present, too intensely opinionated. I genuinely believed that you were perpetually interfering in our autonomous decisions as a unified couple." "Interfering how, precisely?" I continued to press relentlessly, fully determined to extract the entire ugly truth. "You constantly had suggestions regarding the correct way to raise the children, how we should manage our money, and where we should ultimately choose to live," Reese finally admitted, his admission clearly costing him a massive effort. "And Sarah always, without fail, listened to your advice. She always significantly weighed your opinion before she considered mine." There it was, the ugly, naked truth. Reese had always viewed my pure maternal influence as a direct, unacceptable threat to his total, absolute control over Sarah. He simply could not tolerate the deeply threatening idea of his wife possessing a completely independent source of wisdom, validation, and emotional support outside of his rigid authority. "So you systematically eliminated me simply because I represented an alternative, loving voice in Sarah's life?" I coldly summarized. You intentionally eliminated me because my unconditional, fierce love for my own daughter actively threatened your profound need to be her sole, unchallenged source of validation and direction. The deep, heavy silence confirmed my damning analysis. Sarah finally lifted her head, her eyes still red, but with an expression of sudden, agonizing, belated understanding. Mother, I understand now that Reese is fundamentally wrong. I realize that I desperately need your voice back in my life. I understand that I made the single biggest mistake of my entire existence by choosing to please him over honoring the sacred bond we shared. Her words sounded painfully genuine, but they arrived 12 years too late and, critically, in the completely wrong context. It was terribly easy to recognize mistakes when the harsh consequences of those very mistakes were actively destroying your life financially. You understand now that you need my voice back in your life. I repeated her precise words slowly. But specifically, you need my voice to decisively utter the word yes to a loan of $100,000. Sarah visibly flinched at the surgical, precise accuracy of my observation. Reese, conversely, appeared intensely irritated by my absolute refusal to meekly accept the convenient narrative of convenient repentance they had so meticulously constructed. Victoria, enough with the transparent psychological games, he finally exploded, fully revealing his true, unvarnished personality for the first time that entire afternoon. We get it. You are profoundly angry, we get it. We made colossal mistakes, but we are genuinely here now, actively asking for help, and truly willing to make amends. What precisely more do you want from us? His raw outburst was the precise, defining moment I had patiently waited for. The moment the fragile mask of vulnerability completely fell away, revealing the controlling, manipulative, insecure man he had always been. The exact man who had aggressively convinced Sarah that a mother's pure love was merely emotional drama. What I truly want, Reese, is something you will never, ever possess the capacity to give me, I replied with a cold, absolute calm that dramatically contrasted with his intense agitation. I want 12 years of my finite life returned to me. I want to have known my 3 grandchildren since the moment they were tiny babies. I want to have been actively present for their first steps, their very first words, their first nervous days of school. I stood up from my armchair and slowly walked toward a mahogany bookshelf, where I kept the few precious family photographs I had managed to salvage from my former life. I picked up one particular photo. Sarah at 5 years old, smiling broadly with a gap where her front teeth used to be, fiercely hugging my leg with pure, unadulterated adoration shining in her eyes. This tiny girl loved me unconditionally, I said, holding the photograph out for them to observe. This tiny girl called me her best friend, her hero, her favorite person in the entire world. What precisely happened to this tiny girl, Sarah? Sarah stared at the photograph with an expression of intense, visceral pain that, for a fleeting second, I genuinely feared she might collapse. That little girl grew up and consciously became a profoundly weak woman who passively allowed an insecure man to systematically destroy the single most valuable thing she possessed in her life, Sarah answered, her words surprising me with their sudden, brutal honesty. It was the first time all afternoon that she had demonstrated a real, profound understanding of the true magnitude of what she had permanently lost, not just what she temporarily needed to recover to solve her immediate problems. Exactly, I confirmed, gently returning the photograph to its precise place. And now that profoundly weak woman returns, seeking out the mother she intentionally abandoned, not because she has suddenly found her inherent strength and her independent voice, but purely because she desperately needs money. Reese stood up abruptly, his intense frustration finally overflowing into pure, undiluted fury. You know what, Victoria? Perhaps you were precisely correct from the very beginning. Perhaps you are simply too dramatic, too overly complicated. Perhaps it truly was better for everyone that we decisively distanced ourselves from all this relentless emotional drama. His words were a final, conclusive gift of perfect clarity. After hours of wearing masks and careful manipulation, he had finally and completely shown his true, pathetic essence. A man so profoundly insecure that he felt the desperate need to forcibly isolate his wife from all external sources of love and support, just to feel temporarily powerful. "There he is," I said, smiling genuinely for the very first time that afternoon. "There is the real unmasked man. The man who aggressively convinced my daughter that maternal love was nothing more than emotional drama. The man who simply could not tolerate his wife possessing an independent source of love and support." Sarah looked up at her husband with an expression of intense horror and undeniable belated understanding. "Reese, did you honestly just label my mother's legitimate, agonizing pain as mere drama after we intentionally abandoned her for 12 years? She murmured, her voice laced with disbelief. "Did you truly just confirm that you intentionally manipulated me to push her away?" "Sarah, do not allow her to confuse you with her psychological mind games again," Reese insisted. But his voice had now completely lost the confident, assertive authority it had maintained for so many years. "We urgently need that money. We need to save our family." "Your family," I repeated, walking toward the huge front door, "was completely destroyed 12 years ago when you collectively decided that a loving mother-in-law was fundamentally more dangerous than your inevitable emotional bankruptcy. Now, you are simply reaping the bitter, logical consequences of what you deliberately sowed." Sarah stood up, staggering slightly, slowly following me to the door with uncertain, hesitant steps. "Mother, please. I swear to you that if you just help us now, everything will be different. I will be different. I will establish firm boundaries with Reese. I will bravely defend our relationship." "Sarah," I said, my hand resting gently on the immense doorknob, "you are promising complete transformation only under the extreme duress of financial ruin. You are promising fundamental changes that you utterly failed to implement over 12 years of marriage. Why precisely should I believe that this crisis will magically transform you into fundamentally better people?" Reese approached, adopting a more aggressive, threatening stance. "Victoria, you are going to profoundly regret this unforgivable decision. We are going to inform the entire community how you maliciously abandoned your own family in their direst moment of need. We are going to ensure that absolutely everyone knows precisely what kind of heartless mother you truly are." His pathetic final threat was so predictable, so utterly bankrupt of originality, that it almost made me laugh out loud. It was the last, desperate card of a defeated manipulator who had lost all his power, the empty threat of destroying my social reputation. "Reese," I replied with a profound, unshakable calm that visibly disarmed him. "The community already knows precisely what kind of mother I am. They know that for 12 years I worked tirelessly to the point of utter exhaustion, restoring old furniture to survive. They know I never ever uttered a single negative word about either of you despite your prolonged abandonment. They know I maintained my complete dignity, even when I was living in poverty." I pulled the door wide open, feeling the invigorating sea breeze immediately rush in and fill my home with clean, purifying air. What they are going to discover now is precisely what kind of selfish children and manipulative son-in-law you are. They are going to discover how you treated a loving mother for 12 years and how you only showed up at her new door the very instant you absolutely required money. Sarah paused right on the threshold, turning to look at me one final time. In her eyes, I saw something I hadn't witnessed in decades: respect. Respect mixed with profound pain, searing regret, and a terrified, belated understanding of the immeasurable loss she had inflicted upon herself. "Mother," she whispered, her voice broken, "I truly hope that one day you can find it in your heart to forgive us. I hope one day we can find a true path to genuinely heal all this devastating damage." "Sarah," I replied with a profound sadness that spanned decades of immense pain, "forgiveness is not the weak act of merely forgetting the painful past. It is the powerful, active process of freeing yourself from the immense, debilitating weight of deep-seated resentment. I have already decisively freed myself. What you desperately require is not my forgiveness. It is to finally learn to live, every single day, with the inevitable consequences of your own cold decisions." Reese departed first, clearly furious, defeated, and utterly humiliated. Sarah slowly followed him, turning back multiple times as if she desperately wished to articulate something more, but the necessary words utterly failed to materialize. I watched them walk to their battered old car, their two small, insignificant figures receding against the majestic backdrop of the infinite, powerful ocean. After 12 years, they had finally departed my life in the exact same manner they had entered it, selfishly seeking something only for themselves, without possessing the capacity to offer anything genuine or worthwhile in return. I closed the massive door gently and walked back into my magnificent living room, where the sudden deep silence felt like a tangible, immediate blessing. There were no shouts, no insidious manipulation, no debilitating emotional drama, only profound, absolute peace. I poured myself a chilled glass of fine white wine that I had been saving for an unspecified special occasion and walked out onto my expansive terrace. The sun was slowly beginning its descent, brilliantly painting the vast sky in majestic shades of gold, rose, and brilliant violet that reflected serenely on the calm, rolling waves. My phone instantly rang. It was Evelyn. How exactly did it go with the two unexpected visitors? She asked, with the practiced wisdom of someone who had navigated many similar, treacherous family waters. Exactly as we had predicted, I replied, taking a long, restorative sip of wine and feeling true, lasting peace settled deep into my bones. They came solely for the money, Evelyn, not for any genuine love. They merely confirmed everything we already definitively knew about their true character. And how truly do you feel now, Victoria? I paused, reflecting deeply on her profound question as I watched a lone seagull glide effortlessly and gracefully over the turbulent waves. I feel free, Evelyn. Completely, utterly, and absolutely free. That night, following the call with Evelyn, I walked along the isolated stretch of beach under the brilliant, silent canopy of 1,000 stars, the cool, wet sand pleasantly shifting between my toes, the rhythmic sound of the waves providing a constant, soothing counterpoint to the powerful vastness of the endless ocean. Everything around me served as a constant reminder that I had consciously chosen a life of profound peace over a life burdened by toxic, unnecessary family complications. In the following weeks, the news of Sarah and Reese's visit quickly spread throughout the small, close-knit community, precisely as I had confidently predicted. But the reactions were the complete polar opposite of what Reese had malevolently intended. The women in my support group, and even the local antique dealers, universally expressed their strong support, many of them sharing their own heartbreaking stories of children who only suddenly reappeared when they were desperate for cash. "You performed the absolute right action, Victoria," Mr. Peterson, the antique restorer who specialized in clocks, told me a week later. "A mother who genuinely respects herself teaches her children, even belatedly, to respect her. Do." 2 months later, I received a short, unexpected text message from Sarah. It was simple, unadorned, and crucially, contained no requests or manipulation whatsoever. "Mother, I am currently in intense therapy. I am slowly learning about toxic relationships and how to establish healthy, necessary boundaries. I sincerely hope that one day, when I am truly ready to be the daughter you have always deserved, you might consider allowing me to re-enter your life. I love you." I did not reply immediately. Instead, I quietly saved the message and consciously continued with my vibrant, new life, my quiet mornings of gardening, my fulfilling afternoons helping other resilient older women, and my peaceful evenings in contemplative solitude, serenaded only by the ocean. Perhaps one day Sarah would genuinely locate her independent, strong voice. Perhaps one day she would finally learn to establish and fiercely maintain healthy, absolute boundaries with Reese. Perhaps one day we could slowly build a relationship based on true, mutual respect, rather than overwhelming, selfish need. But until that highly uncertain day, if it ever genuinely arrived, I would proudly continue to live my full, magnificent, and fiercely dignified life, perpetually surrounded by the infinite, powerful ocean, which reminded me daily that some tumultuous, Currents are simply too strong to be changed, and that true wisdom lies in the powerful, difficult art of learning to successfully navigate far calmer waters. The immense money had given me many things, but the single most valuable gift was not the grand house or the luxurious comforts. It was the absolute, unassailable power to choose who was truly deserving of my finite time, my precious energy, and my eternal love. And I had chosen wisely, definitively, and irrevocably. This $11 million inheritance taught me that self-worth is the truest form of wealth. Never allow the people who abandoned you in your poverty to rush back and exploit you in your prosperity. Your peace is worth more than any price tag, and your true value is not defined by their need, but by your dignity. If this story of reclaiming power and finding peace resonates deeply within your soul, please hit that subscribe button and join my community. Let us continue to learn the priceless art of self-respect together, because every woman over 50 deserves to live like the queen she truly is. Now tell me in the comments, would you have been strong enough to close that door?